public sector now for over 25 years. And it's amazing that the conversation is still going on, not so much about whether women should be in public office, but more as to how they get into office and how they do when they get into public office. Public office has been defined as a position of authority or trust and service to the public, especially within government, and such offices exist in the executive arm of government, legislature, judiciary, and related agencies. Entry into these offices are either elective or appointive processes. And the number of women in public office is determined by how they prepare for and engage in such processes. A number of women that I've spoken to, who I think should be in public office, are averse to those political processes, speaking of them as demeaning, dirty, corrupt. And even though I agree that politics is not for the faint-hearted, it means that these women are allowing other people to make decisions about their own lives, public policy decisions. So how then do we get women to own their own political destinies? The fact is that although political office has a higher calling, we all know that, to do good for all, to provide service for others, the bottom line is that it's about self-interest. Now, self-interest is varied. It varies from individuals, different groups, organized groups, groups that are not so organized. And every individual human has his needs or her needs, desires, priorities, and preferences. In the world where we live, politics is the management of the power relations between these interests and determines who gets what and how. In government, it is these varying interests that determine how resources are shared. And that's why everyone jostles to get a seat at the table. They need to be represented. If you're absent at the table, so are your interests. I believe that women need to be at the seat of government for 4 good reasons: population, taxes, votes, and difference. And I'll unpack that for you. Women are 50% of the world's population. Therefore, any issues that affect us are actually national mainstream issues. They're not side or separate issues. By numbers alone, we ought to be at the table. Secondly, we pay taxes, indirectly or directly. And we ought to be able to demand that the money that we pay translates in supporting that programs. The money that we pay translates into activities that support issues that affect us. Thirdly, elections in most countries count on women to vote. Majority of votes are cast by women, but the minority, they get the minority of seats that either are appointed or elected. And we're going to come back to the why on that. But lastly, even though women and men are equal, we are different. From the moment of birth to the onset of menstruation, the rites of passage, the challenges of pregnancy and childbirth, motherhood, menopause, these are issues that affect us very differently from the other gender. The list is actually endless. Whether we're talking about formal discrimination or informal discrimination in our educational places, in our workplaces, whether we're talking about physical and emotional violence rained on our bodies or our minds in private or public spaces, whether we're talking about the challenges of single motherhood, which is now becoming a big phenomenon, or the fact that we have become the primary givers of our children and our elderly parents, all these situations have challenges that need solutions, which can only be articulated by those who are affected. But the fact is that those who are most affected are not the ones largely being elected or appointed. They're not the ones looking into the laws and policies and deciding where the resources are going that would address these issues. Women really must take their right place in center stage politics, but of course getting there isn't easy. In the past, power and privilege only belonged to white, wealthy, Western, healthy, educated males. Some say it still does. But nowadays, well, with the advent of democracy and, the promotion of human rights, more marginalized groups have sort of come out somewhat. And now here in Africa, you will find privilege with black, wealthy, healthy, educated males. The female species doesn't really feature in the power food chain, unless right at the bottom. And that's where you're really going to find poor, uneducated black women, fact. History has shown us that the process of ceding power is often a struggle. Ceasefires and treaties are negotiated after blood has been spilled, and pain and sacrifice make martyrs. The women's worldwide movement all over has shown us this. Where women have gained entry into politics, you will find that they are brave pioneers, few in numbers, but strong and courageous, who have faced an avalanche of abuse, ostracization, and the application of double standards. Young women now, and I worry about this, I worry that young women are coming into adulthood without an understanding of the world that we now live in, and that they enjoy rights that women didn't enjoy 100 years ago. I worry that if they don't understand this, the gains that women have made will be rolled back, if they don't understand how hard it was to make it easy for them now. I worry that young women today do not know the names of Susan B. Anthony, Angela Davis, Benazir Bhutto, Maya Angelou, Andrea Dworkin, and Wangari Maathai. Many of you will argue, of course we know Wangari Maathai. She's our Nobel laureate. But do you know Wangari Maathai? Do you know her story? As a university student in the mid-80s, I was struck by this woman called Wangari Maathai. She was a clarion call for the women's rights movement. She was brave and defiant. She had a message of hope. She challenged the status quo. And what did she get for it? She was abused and demeaned. And if you were to ask your mothers, who were then women, working mothers then, so many women were ashamed. We were told, you don't want to be like Wangari Maathai. Women are supposed to be seen and not heard. But Wangari didn't care. She had issues. She had big issues. She was talking about planting trees. She was talking about conserving our water towers. She was talking about the environment and saving our parks. And everyone else was talking about her divorce and how she shouldn't talk to the president because she was a woman. Years later, I was privileged to serve with Wangari in the 9th Parliament, and I asked her, how did you manage that? How did you manage the isolation, the pain, the struggle all alone? And she said, all women in politics will face these problems because we have a double standard that applies to women who go into politics that doesn't apply to men. Wangari called it the application of neck-down politics. She said that whereas women are talking about things that they're thinking with their brains, which is neck up, and they're talking about hospitals and schools and roads, the men who are opposing them are looking neck down. Is she married? Is she not? Is she divorced? Is she remarried? Does she have children? She doesn't. She has too many children. Her children are from different fathers. They're preoccupied by everything apart from what she is thinking from the neck up. And these are the challenges that women continue to face today. And it's tough. It's tough. Up until about 10 years ago, it was kind of difficult to find the presence of women in political parties in this country. But in 2007, I'm happy I was part of that initiative. The women in parliament spearheaded an effort that introduced into law the requirement that 1/3 of the national executive committees of political parties must be women. And it was a tough fight. Nobody wants to share those kind of seats. No one gives up power. However, we said, as taxpayers, women, because the government had introduced a political parties fund, we demanded that that political parties fund, which was part of our taxes, needed to show how it was going to benefit women. And therefore, we had this proviso that the 1/3 women would be in the political parties. And then when the law came into place, there was a stipulated deadline. And you know, it worked. You should have seen them scrambling, looking, trying to finding women to meet the stipulated deadline so that they could get the money for the political parties. That's another thing that I learned how to do. You have to connect one interest to another interest in order to gain some of the things that we want for women. We now have our foot in the door. It's not that impressive. When I was in Parliament, we were 18 women out of 224. Now, in the National Assembly, there are 67 women in a House of 350. We are growing, but we're not yet there. In those 20 years, women who have been, in the 20 years since we started working on these issues, women have given our issues voice, but they've also learned how to negotiate. Working by demand nowadays doesn't work so well. We've had to learn how to negotiate with the opposite gender. We've also learned how to strategize to be work-wise. We've also learned how to piggyback on others' self-interest in order to achieve women's gains. And I'd like to share a brief experience of my own on this. As a young women activist in the late 90s, in the Federation of Women Lawyers, we were very concerned that many young girls were dropping out of school. And when we studied it carefully, we realized that these girls would not go to school during their menses because they could not afford sanitary towels. And therefore, they would not go to class, they would not do exams, and they would drop out of school. We tried to find out why this was so. We talked to the manufacturers, and they said the government was levying such, a load amount of tax on these sanitary towels, and that's why they were so expensive. Off we trooped to the Minister of Finance's office, and we asked him, so what's going on? Why are sanitary towels so expensive? And he did his homework and came back to us and said, oh my goodness, you see, I have this group of 17 experts, all male, that sit and decide, itemize things and put them in different tax categories. And these men simply, when they came to sanitary towels, simply put it together with lipstick and perfume and women's things. And that's why sanitary towels were being taxed as luxury items. Never mind that this same group of experts had subsidized male condoms, etc. I'm sure if there was one woman, and now there are women in that committee, it would have been different. So here we were, sanitary towels unaffordable, and what do we do about it? The minister said, well, my hands are tied, you have to talk to Parliament and blah, blah, fish. Anyway, I got the opportunity. I joined Parliament in 2003, and we're like, yay, okay, now let's deal with this issue together with my fellow women parliamentarians, and let's get this issue. Let's talk about zero rating the sanitary towels. It didn't work for a whole year until somebody, a friend of mine, male, in Treasury whispered and said, you're not selling it right. We're very sympathetic about the girls not going to school. But, this is a whole, you need to sell it right. And he gave us a method of how to do this. So firstly, we packaged it. We were able to explain to the Treasury mandarins that if girls don't drop out, if girls continue to drop out of school, in 20 years' time, it would affect the economy of the country. If these girls went to school, their contribution towards the GDP would be much higher. It makes more economic sense for them to go to school. It makes more sense to the treasure mandarins. And they were like, that's a good point. But still, we had Parliament to deal with. And in Parliament, they, lots of older, traditional, we do that a lot, by the way, in this country. We tend to vote for older, traditional males. I don't know if you've noticed that. But anyway, so that's what we were looking at. And first of all, they didn't even want to discuss this thing. They looked down upon advertising sanitary towels on television. What do you mean we're going to talk about it in the August House? Talk about what? Bleeding? Blood? Pads? No. So we thought about it and we said, okay, we're in an African setting in a country and lots of our colleagues are polygamous. And one very influential member of parliament had 4 wives and 12 daughters. So we sat him down, pencil and paper, calculating how, with all these females in your house, 16, you spend so much per packet of sanitary towels per month. Multiply by 16, multiply by 12 for the year, multiply by the number of years that you will be actually buying these sanitary towels for these women. And at the end of it, I tell you, he threw down his pencil, said the government was ripping him off. And he's like, you know what? In fact, he just said, they're thieves. I remember that distinctly. They're thieves. He said, I'm going to help you do this. And he helped us mobilize all the other men. And in 2004, sanitary towels was zero-rated. The next time you vote, the next time you pay tax, the next time you experience discrimination, please, don't wait for the next time to become involved. Get a seat at the table.